pop-up blockers. And finally, should you need technical assistance, as a best practice, we suggest you first refresh your browser. If that does not resolve the issue, please click on the support option in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for online troubleshooting. It is now my pleasure to turn today's program over to Ms. Nina Brown-Ashford. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, and thank you to all of our participants who have taken the time out to join today's webinar and learn more about our Emergency Triage, Treat, and Transport, or ET3 model. When CMM first embarked on developing this model, we learned that if you call 911, currently ambulances are only paid if they bring you to the hospital. This obviously is a negative incentive, which really incentivizes ambulance providers and suppliers to take beneficiaries to the hospital, even if they could be treated in a lower acuity setting. One of the critical elements for Secretary Azar's value-based agenda is to pay for outcomes. We really want to move to pay for health, not process, and we want to make sure that we're aligning incentives with better care and not focusing solely on volume. So we know that a payment system that only pays first responders to take people to the hospital really does create the wrong incentive and leads to unnecessary ER visits and hospitalizations that have the potential to harm patient quality. We are really excited to share with you the ET3 model and dig a little more into the details. We really believe that this is going to be a smarter, better way to pay first responders to help our beneficiaries. We also know that if you have a heart attack and call 911, every minute counts, and 1 minute can truly be the difference between life and death. We really do believe that this new intervention will enable treating in place or in other destinations. Will save about 45 minutes of EMS response time compared to transporting an individual to the emergency department. That means this is 45 minutes of time that is freed up for first responders who are then available to respond to true emergencies like heart attacks and strokes. When we look at those 45 minutes nationally, they really do add up. We estimate that it could save about 50 million minutes of time each year that can then be devoted to people that truly need it the most. This will translate not only saved lives, but also into cost savings for the healthcare system. We are very excited to share the model with you and answer your questions as we think about how we're going to begin to roll out this effort. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Juliana Tiongson, who is the Senior Advisor and Acting Model Lead for ET3 in the Prevention and Population Health Group at CMMI.
Thank you, Nina. So first of all, our agenda for today's call is we're going to speak briefly about the statute for the CMS Innovation Center, and then provide some background on what led to the development of the ET3 model. Then we'll get into the details as much as we can on the ET3 model goals and design. And lastly, we'll provide a timeline and next steps. Next slide, please. Okay, so the CMS Innovation Center. Next slide, please. The statute for the center is the purpose of the center is to test innovative payment and service delivery models to reduce program expenditures while preserving or enhancing quality of care furnished to individuals under such titles. There's 3 scenarios that are allowable under the statute for conducting these tests. The first is that the test improves quality while keeping cost neutral. The second is that quality remains unchanged, but we achieve savings, so costs are reduced. And the third, the one that's the gold standard that we always really strive for, is that the test improves quality and also achieves savings to the Medicare program. So if a model test falls into any of these categories and meets other statutory prerequisites, the statute does allow the Secretary to expand the duration and scope of a model through rulemaking. Next slide, please. Okay, next. just to talk about the background that led to the development of this model. And Nina did speak to this a little bit already, but currently Medicare pays for ground ambulance transportation in a limited set of circumstances following a 911 call. And most often, the caller is transported to a hospital emergency department. There are other allowable destinations. However, it's typically to the hospital emergency department. And this creates somewhat of a perverse incentive where callers are taken to the medical emergency room or another high acuity care setting, even when a lower acuity less costly destination may be more appropriate and meet their needs. Next slide. So through our robust engagement with stakeholders in the industry, as well as looking at some research, including a white paper that was done by the Department of Health and Human Services in conjunction with Department of Transportation, that demonstrated the opportunity here that we're calling optimal care at the right time and right place. But basically what this white paper showed was that 16% of Medicare fee-for-service emergency ambulance transports to the ED could have been treated in lower acuity settings. And this resulted in a potential savings of $560 million that could have been realized had these 16% been taken to a doctor's office rather than the hospital ED. This was, I believe this paper came out in 2013. We did subsequent analysis with more recent data that validated the similar opportunities. So next slide, please. Okay, I'm now going to go through the specifics of the model. So the current state, a 911 call is received, ambulance service is typically initiated, and then the ambulance either transports the individual to receive additional care, generally to a hospital emergency department, or the ambulance arrives but does not transport the individual. So in that lower left-hand box, in the current state, the ambulance does not get paid because they're not transporting the caller anywhere. Okay, next slide. So in terms of realigning incentives, this diagram shows what the model will do. We'll test. And so, again, top box, 911 call is received. And then, in some cases, the caller is transferred to a medical triage line to speak with a healthcare professional about their concerns. Or they are not transferred, and an ambulance is initiated. The reason I said in some cases is that this medical triage line will not be available in every region that's participating in the model, but there will be medical triage lines, and I'll be speaking about that opportunity in later slides in some of the participating regions. So once we go back to ambulance service initiated, the ambulance can either transport the individual to receive additional care, and they could, per what they do now, take them to the hospital ED, or in cases where it's deemed that the beneficiary is eligible for transport to an alternative destination, which is one of the new services allowed under this model, Of course, this determination would be made based on medical protocols that the ambulance crew is following, protocols that have been approved by the medical director. So that alternative destination could be offered. The beneficiary will always have the opportunity to ask to be taken to the hospital emergency department, and that will have to be honored. The other scenario that could happen is that the ambulance arrives but does not transport the individual anywhere. And in that case, under the model, the other new service that could potentially be offered to beneficiaries that met eligibility for this, again, based on clinical protocols that were approved by the ambulance crew's medical director, could offer treatment without transport or treatment in place. It's very important to note that this will always need to include a qualified health practitioner, either on-site, providing the care, or via telehealth. Okay, so the overall ET3 model goals are to provide person-centered care such that individuals receive care safely at the right time and place, increase efficiency, as Nina mentioned, in the EMS system, to allow ambulances to more readily respond and focus on high acuity cases, including heart attacks and stroke. And lastly, encourage appropriate utilization of emergency medical services to meet the healthcare needs effectively. Okay, so to go over 3 core features of the ET3 model, there will be quality-adjusted payments for EMS innovations. So as I mentioned, there's 2 new possible payments for eligible individuals following a 911 call. Those are transport to an alternative destination or treatment in place without transport. Payments will be tied to performance milestones over time to hold participants accountable for quality. The next core feature is align regional markets. So, as I mentioned earlier, there will be medical triage lines available in some regions. We will facilitate this by making cooperative agreements available to local governments, their designees, or other entities that operate or have authority over 1 or more 911 dispatches, to either establish a medical triage line or greatly expand upon an existing triage line. Of course, the benefit to having the medical triage line is to prevent the initiation of an ambulance in the first place where appropriate. We are also seeking to advance multi-payer adoption of the model to support overall success and sustainability, and believe that the medical triage line would benefit all payers in the region. So that does help with the aligning the regional markets in that regard. The third core feature is enhanced monitoring and enforcement. We are building accountability through the monitoring of specific quality metrics, and we'll be closely monitoring for adverse events. We're including a robust enforcement to ensure patient safety and program integrity. Next slide, please. Okay, so there will be both participants and awardees in the program. So the ambulance suppliers and providers will focus on direct services, while local governments or their designees or other entities that have authority over a 911 dispatch will be the awardees that would receive cooperative agreements to establish or expand upon an existing medical triage line. So as far as and this has been a point of confusion as we rolled this out, so I'm trying to clear this up for everybody. But so the model participants will enter into participant agreements with CMS, and these will be the ambulance suppliers and providers. They will support EMS innovation by transporting Medicare fee-for-service beneficiaries to covered destinations, alternative destinations, and/or providing treatment in place when appropriate with a qualified healthcare practitioner on site or via telehealth. The local governments, again, will be involved through the cooperative agreements in establishing the medical triage line. Next slide. Okay, so this is more along the same lines, really just trying to extinguish the difference between model participants and awardees. So the only people that will qualify as model participants are Medicare-enrolled ambulance suppliers and providers. They will enter into model participant agreements with CMS. It is a voluntary model with national solicitation. Selection will be based on regional clusters and demonstrated ability to achieve model goals. And they will be providing the direct delivery of interventions to individuals following a call to 911. The local governments or their designees that operate or have authority over one or more 911 dispatches are the awardees. They will enter into cooperative agreements with CMS. This is also voluntary, and the selection criteria for this will restrict participation in regions where there are ET3 model participants. So we will first issue the request for applications for model participants. Once those model participants have been selected, we will issue the cooperative, the notice of funding opportunity for the cooperative agreements. And, again, only areas that have ambulances selected to participate in the model will be considered for award of a cooperative agreement. Next slide. Okay, so the two new services that I mentioned, ambulance transport to alternative destinations and treatment in place via a qualified healthcare practitioner, will build off of Medicare's existing fee-for-service structure. We have also added the performance-based payment adjustment for achievement on key quality measures. Talk a little bit more about each of these in the next few slides. Okay, to focus on ambulance transport to alternative destinations. Alternative destinations may include federally qualified health centers, doctors' offices, urgent care centers, community health centers, to name a few. Participants furnishing transport to alternative destinations will receive payment at a rate equivalent to the Medicare Part B ambulance fee schedule base rate for basic life support, ground ambulance, in addition to mileage and any other applicable add-on or adjustment to the BLS rate. So we really wanted to neutralize the incentives here. So we wanted to pay the same rate to ambulance providers that they would receive had they taken somebody to the emergency department, that they will receive that same rate for taking them to an alternative destination when appropriate. Okay, similarly for the treatment in place via a qualified healthcare practitioner, either on scene, meaning the qualified healthcare practitioner, such as a physician, nurse practitioner, PA, would be traveling with the ambulance crew and provide treatment on the scene, or ambulance suppliers and providers have partnered with a qualified health practitioner to be contacted to provide treatment in place via telehealth. In this case, the participating ambulance supplier or provider will bill Medicare as the telehealth originating site at a rate equivalent to the base BLS ground ambulance rate. So again, we wanted to make all payments equal to the ambulance supplier or provider in any of the three scenarios: transport to a covered destination such as ED, transport to an alternative destination, or provide treatment in place. The qualified healthcare practitioners that treat the individuals in place using telehealth. Sorry, let me back up for a second. So the partnering qualified healthcare practitioners that are providing treatment in place will bill Medicare using the HCPCS codes that currently exist. Depending on the services rendered, they will bill CMS Part B Medicare as they normally do. We are also offering an increased payment rate for non-business hours. For the qualified healthcare practitioner using telehealth in non-business hours, there will be a code for an increased rate available during those times. Next slide. Okay, so I briefly mentioned there's going to be a performance-based payment adjustment possible for achievement on key quality measures. This would be beginning in year 3, that participants will have an opportunity to receive as much as an additional 5% in model payments based on performance and quality measures. And there'll be more details available on that in the RFA and subsequent documents that are released on the program. Okay, so just to summarize the model before moving into the timeline. So the existing challenge is that Medicare primarily pays for emergency ground transportation when individuals are taken to a hospital emergency department. And so this results in typically beneficiaries, when an ambulance is initiated, they are taken to a high acuity care setting, usually an ED, even when a lower acuity, less costly destination may be more appropriate. The model interventions seek to remedy this situation by allowing ambulances to transport to alternative destinations or offer treatment in place when appropriate. Then we have also the medical triage line that will work synergistically with these other interventions in areas where that is available, and performance-based payment adjustment on key quality measures, as I mentioned. Lastly, the model goals, once again, are really to provide person-centered care, increase efficiency in the EMS system, and encourage appropriate utilization of services to meet healthcare needs most effectively. Okay, next slide. We can go to the timeline. So our timeline is that we hope to have the request for applications released this summer, announce participants this fall, And then, as I mentioned, once we know who the participants are, and again, the participants are Medicare enrolled ambulance suppliers or providers that are selected to participate in the model. Once we know who those are, we will put out the notice of funding opportunity approximately in the fall, and it will only be open to areas where those selected participants are, and award the cooperative agreements in early 2020. So in the meantime, between now and then, we are encouraging interested stakeholders to really determine where your interests and capabilities lie in terms of the interventions that you would be able to provide, and seek opportunities for partnership in terms of partnering with alternative destinations in your communities, identifying those that would be most beneficial, and establishing those partnerships, as well as partnering with qualified healthcare practitioners for the treatment in place intervention. And then to look out for the request for applications and NOFA releases in the summer and fall, respectively. Lastly, we have a resource page. We have a dedicated mailbox to the model. Please send all of your inquiries to the mailbox. And, of course, there are some things, some details that we cannot release at this time because they're, still being developed and going through clearance. They will be available in the RFA and the NOFA once released, but any information we can provide, we will. So here's the mailbox. We'll continue to update our fact sheets and possibly post some FAQs on our webpage as well. So please use these resources. I think now we're going to go ahead and start answering some questions that have come in through the chat while I was going through the slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we would like to take any questions you might have for us today. To ask a question, simply click the Q&A button on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Type your question in the open area and click Send. Presenters, you may begin with your web questions.
Thank you for your patience, and we're going to our first question.
Thank you, everyone. We have received several questions related to the treatment in place intervention specifically. As a reminder, model participants in these interventions, who will be ambulance suppliers and providers, must partner with Medicare-enrolled qualified healthcare practitioners. Those practitioners will render treatment in place services, which can be done either via telehealth or in person. A Medicare-enrolled qualified healthcare practitioner in this model is a provider who meets state, local, and professional requirements to render particular healthcare services to beneficiaries and has entered into a voluntary agreement with the participant to render such services through this model. Only these types of practitioners may provide treatment in place in the ET3 model. So again, there is a partnership between ambulance suppliers and providers and these Medicare-enrolled practitioners. We recognize that community paramedicine is an important model that a lot of different groups and states are exploring ET3 is not explicitly a community paramedicine model, and we want to make that distinction clear. I will also build on what Juliana had mentioned previously during the slide presentation, that additional details about the requirements for the model, including for the treatment-in-place intervention, will be released in the request for applications, which CMMI anticipates will be available somewhere around the summer of 2019.
All right, thank you, Geraldine. Please stand by as we review more questions.
We received a question asking whether CMS will encourage states to change laws to allow ambulances to transport patients to alternative destinations. The Innovation Center recognizes that the legal landscape for emergency services varies greatly across states and sometimes even within states. CMS, in designing this model, aims to promote flexibility that will allow participating ambulance suppliers to meet the needs of their individual communities. However, as a federal agency, CMS does not have authority over state and local laws, so we encourage interested potential participants to determine how their state and local legal requirements could intersect with the ET3 model requirements. This may require you to consult with your own counsel as necessary. Again, we recognize that when the RFA is released, there will be more details that may allow you the right level of information to do that analysis.
All right, please stand by.
We received a question about what the definition of ambulance will be in this model. The ET3 model is adopting the federal regulatory definition of ambulance, which imposes certain requirements about the type of vehicle that can be used as an ambulance in a Medicare-related ambulance service. The requirements include specific designs, indicating that the vehicle is able to respond to medical emergencies or provide acute medical care and complies with all state and local laws governing an emergency transport vehicle. The vehicle must be equipped with emergency warning lights and sirens as required by state or local laws, must be equipped with telecom equipment as required by state or local law, and must be equipped with stretcher, linens, emergency medical supplies, oxygen equipment, and other life-saving emergency medical equipment as required by state or local laws. Again, this is the standard definition in federal regulation of ambulances. The ET3 model does not propose to change that definition.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. There has been a number of questions regarding the key performance measures. I will ask you to remain patient. All of those measures will be being indicated in future documents, so look for that in the RFA, which is the request for funding opportunity that will be coming out this summer.
All right, thank you. Please stand by.
Hi, everyone. There have been a number of questions about the telehealth practitioner payment after hours and during business hours. We just want to stress again that for treatment in place will always require an advanced treatment practitioner. During business hours, they will also receive an additional payment, and there will be another payment for after hours. So there will always be a separate payment to this qualified healthcare practitioner, and this payment, just to reiterate, will be separate from the payment that the ambulance suppliers will be getting paid.
Thank you, Sarah.
We've received a number of questions about the involvement of other payers outside of Medicare fee-for-service, including Medicaid agencies. ET3 is at its core a Medicare fee-for-service model, but we recognize that emergency services treat patients with a variety of coverage, and we would encourage multi-payer alignment in communities that are interested in ET3 that will allow success and the ability to build efficiencies across payers. The application will ask for information about other payers that are likely to be involved. But again, this is a Medicare fee-for-service program, and so if applicants are able to show their likely success using Medicare fee-for-service only, they would potentially be good candidates for participating in the model. So to recap, we encourage potential participants, so ambulance suppliers and providers, to consider what other payers might be well aligned to work with them in implementing the Medicare fee-for-service aspect of the model, but also build outside of Medicare fee-for-service and include other payers.
Thank you, Geraldine.
Hi, it's Juliana. We've gotten several questions, and I just want to restate that there are two opportunities here. One is for ambulance suppliers and providers to enter into participant agreements with CMS. This will be the first opportunity put out, and they will be able to provide transport to alternative destinations or treatment in place under this model with a qualified health care practitioner. In all cases, they will be paid the BLS ground ambulance transportation rate plus mileage and other applicable adjustments. The second opportunity is for local governments, their designees or other entities that are operating a 911 dispatch to apply for a cooperative agreement. We will put out a notice of funding opportunity for these cooperative agreements. There will be a limited number of cooperative agreements available. As I said, this will not likely be in every region that we have participating ambulance suppliers, but it will be in some. So those are the two opportunities. Hopefully that clears things up there. Thank you.
We received a question asking whether if a patient elects to use an alternative destination intervention, whether they will have the option to specify the alternative destination, or whether they will be transferred only to a place that has contracted with the model. The model aims to increase beneficiary choice, and so the beneficiary will always have the choice to elect to go to the emergency department. I want to emphasize that at the top. If the patient would consider being transported to an alternative destination, the ambulance supplier is not required to take that patient to any destination that the patient elects, but rather present them with options based on alternative destinations with which that ambulance supplier has created agreements. We understand that the alternative destination partner has to have some awareness of the types of interventions and types of patients that may be received through the ET3 model. So those agreements are very important. So again, the patient may not be able to select the specific destination to which they would prefer to go. And in that case, they could always revise their determination and request to go to the emergency department as long as they meet medical necessity for emergency ambulance transport under Medicare rules.
Thank you, Geraldine. Please stand by as you review more questions. Please stand by, and thank you for your patience. We're still reviewing your numerous and outstanding questions. Thank you.
Building on some information Juliana shared about the two different opportunities that will be made public, there is an additional distinction between the request for applications, which is aimed at attracting ambulance suppliers and providers. There is no hard cap on the number of providers and suppliers who can respond to and be evaluated and approved as participants through the RFA. Separately, there is a notice of funding opportunity that will be announced aimed at local governments and their designees to develop a medical triage line or expand an existing medical triage line. That separate funding opportunity and those separate aims is capped at up to 40 specific awards under the NOFO. So again, the request for applications, that is the award, or that is the opportunity that's aimed at individual ambulance suppliers and providers. There is no set cap in terms of the number of participants at this point. The NOFO, we estimate that up to 40 individual awards to those local governments or their designees to establish or expand 911 medical triage lines will be limited to that 40 number.
Thank you, Geraldine.
We also want to mention that given the number of questions and the great questions that are coming in, our team is going to continue to review them. We know we have limited time to respond to questions live today, but all of these questions will be reviewed by the ET3 team and will be used to develop future public FAQ documents that will be shared via the website and the listserv.
Thank you.
We received a question about whether the ET3 model would reimburse ambulance suppliers or providers for transporting patients home from their alternative destination site. That is not one of the new payments in the model. The ET3 model is aimed at emergency ambulance transport only. So once a patient is stabilized, hopefully at the alternative destination site, the ET3 model would not reimburse for non-emergency transport back to that patient's home.
Thank you.
Hello, we've received a number of questions about how to obtain the RFA. The RFA will be posted on our website, ET3 Model, at cms.hhs.gov this summer.
Thank you.
We received a question asking whether on-site providers will be able to bill for services or only for remote telemedicine visits. In the case of a treatment-in-place intervention where a qualified healthcare practitioner is involved and has rendered services, that practitioner may bill for Part B services whether they are rendered by a telehealth or if they are in person with the ambulance crew. Again, we emphasize that the ambulance professionals, so an EMT or a paramedic that is not a Medicare-enrolled physician or other practitioner, cannot bill independently for rendering Part B services. However, if that qualified healthcare practitioner is in person, they may bill just as they may bill if they render services through telehealth.
Thank you.
So we received a question about whether current community paramedicine and other mobile health programs that allow the paramedic to assess a patient under their protocol of their medical director, allow them to treat the patient at the scene and release them without telehealth services would be eligible for ET3 model admission and payment under this model. Again, the answer to that is no. We are not a community paramedicine model. We require that partnership between the participant, ambulance supplier, or provider and the separate qualified healthcare practitioner who's independently enrolled in Medicare and is rendering those services.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much for your patience. We're looking to answer one final question before the end of the hour, so please be patient. Thank you.
We received a question about slide 17, which is being projected now on your screens, asking whether CMS or another entity reimburses for treatment in place via telehealth. In the case where a qualifying service is presented through telehealth, there will be separate payments made to the qualified healthcare practitioner who renders that service, and a separate payment made to the ambulance supplier who facilitates that service and is providing Medicare-covered emergency ambulance services. So again, there will be two separate payments to those two entities. There is not an expectation that either the ambulance supplier or the qualified healthcare practitioner would have to split one fee to cover the partnership.
All right, thank you.
Okay, well, we are out of time. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. And please check our webpage often for updates. We are planning to have another webinar on March 7th. For those who missed this one, or anybody's welcome to participate in that. It will be basically the same information that was presented here today. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks to all our participants for joining.